Very good afternoon and welcome once again to a weekly COVID-19 public health update with Montgomery County Executive Mark Elrich. I'm Laura Vigili, Hispanic Public Information Officer, and joining us today is Dr. Earl Stoddard, who is Assistant Chief Administrative Officer, as well as Dr. James Bridgers, who is our Acting Health Officer. Joining us today as well is Dr. Raymond Crowell, Director of the Department of Health and Human Services. Last but not least, we have a very special guest, Council Member Will Yowando, also joining us today. Reporters, remember to use the chat for the Q&A portion of this presentation, and the County Executive as well as the Council Member have a 1:30 hard stop this afternoon. However, the other officials will remain in case you have additional questions. With that, I'm going to toss it to you, Mr. County Executive. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you again for joining us today. This morning, I joined the County Council and our HHS department, along with a host of our folks in the county who provide homelessness services for our annual event to remember the homeless, especially those who've died. I think COVID really highlighted the urgency of ending homelessness. I will say the steps we took during the pandemic, during the worst of the pandemic, definitely reduced the impact on the homeless community. We worked hard to provide more resources and opportunities for temporary shelter and permanent housing, and we've been able to finally end the practice of providing shelter for only 4 months of the year for those experiencing homelessness, thanks to the recently opened Neville Street shelter. That shelter is not just a bunch of beds, it also gives people a place to be during the day and resources to help them get additional help. We've also provided an additional $3 million for the rental assistance program and $2 million for rapid rehousing to continue the investment after federal COVID funds have run out. I believe that these combined efforts are helping us better care for this vulnerable population, and I will continue our efforts to provide safe and secure housing for all. Speaking of housing, the rent is too damn high. This is not a new phenomenon, but it's a problem the government has avoided for far too long. This chart from Realtor.com shows the increase in rent in the nation's 50 largest metropolitan areas, including our region. Rent has been steadily increasing since January 2021, and nationally, it's about 17% more than it was last year. The national rental vacancy rate has been below 6% in each of the last 3 quarters. Landlords with fewer available units are charging higher rents, and at the same time, for-sale home prices continue to climb. Renters have been left with few options but to pay these rising rents. You could probably say no options. We cannot ignore this in Montgomery County. I'm glad to be joined today by Councilmember Will Yowando to go over our new temporary rent stabilization bill that was introduced to the County Council yesterday. This bill provides a 6-month extension of limitations on rent increases at 4.4%, the most recent Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index for total housing cost change. This is to make sure that tenants who are not hit too hard with rent increases while also allowing increases for operating costs. This legislation is necessary for the immediate protection of the public interest and will take effect on the date on which it becomes law. County renters continue to face economic hardships due to COVID-19 impact on income, health, and family obligations. Census surveys indicate 17 to 20% of renters in Maryland have not been able to get current on rent, consistent with the county survey of multifamily tenants. The Council and I recognized these impacts when we extended protections from unrestricted rent increases. Those just ended on June 1st, and we're already hearing of 15 to 20% increases being proposed, and even greater. Our residents are already being impacted by the growing inflation, high gas prices, and high food prices. They simply cannot absorb extra high rent increases at this time, and we need to act. An important program that we're going to talk about today, and that's why Councilmember Yowando is going to be joining us, is we're going to talk about an update on the Guaranteed Income Pilot Program. This pilot was proposed by Councilmember Yowando and passed the Council this past December. The purpose of the program is to provide financial stability and give residents the ability to make their own choices to improve their economic position. The pilot's going to serve 300 households. 100 will be individuals from the homeless continuum, and another 200 have applied to participate in the program. This program is already serving 53 participants. The remaining 247 have been selected and will soon be contacted to get their orientation. I fully support this program, and I'm looking forward to seeing the outcomes. This weekend is Saturday, June 19th, and that's Juneteenth. Montgomery County will be celebrating this, and next Monday the county government will be closed and observing this national holiday. This Friday evening we will host the African American Living Legends Awards. On Saturday morning I will be joining Councilmember Will Jawando for the official renaming ceremony of the Silver Spring Library to be named after Brigadier General Charles McGee, a longtime Montgomery County resident, Tuskegee Airman, and an American hero. I appreciate Councilmember Jawando's leadership on this renaming. General McGee's life and legacy deserves this appropriate honor from our county. Also on Saturday, we're hosting our 25th Juneteenth celebration at Black Rock, the Center for Arts in Germantown. It will focus on food, crafts, and fantastic artistic performances, as well as some really great soul, jazz, and Caribbean music. And on Sunday, we're going to be announcing our new affordable housing project in the historically black community of Emery Grove. This is an exciting collaboration between Emery Grove United Methodist Church, the Housing Opportunities Commission, the Parks Department, MCPS, and the county. Together, we're working to use county land to create an affordable homeownership and rental opportunity and to restore a vibrant historic community that disappeared under the guise of urban renewal, or as other people call it, urban removal, decades ago. I will now turn this over to Councilmember Jawando, but I also want to note that this weekend is also Father's Day, and I want to wish all the fathers who may be listening or seeing this later a happy Father's Day. And so, Mr. Jawando, you want to have some comments?
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, County Executive, and thanks for allowing me to join you today for your press brief. Good to see everybody. Thank you for all you do. A lot going on. Juneteenth obviously will be is 19th, but we're doing the celebrations on the 18th. I just want to make sure we get all those the Saturday and Sunday because we've got everything packed into one weekend. It's kind of happening all at once. And I'm really excited about that. I'll start with that. I think it's an important commemoration this year more than most because we're at a time in history where the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow and institutionalized racism and segregation, all the things that we've been fighting through since we've been a nation, before we've been a nation, are now being challenged. Books are being banned. People don't want to talk about what actually happened here in the country and can't move forward if we don't do that. So it's another reason on top of many others why Juneteenth is so important. So I'm also really proud that we're going to officially have the new signs and a dedication and a exhibit for Brigadier General Charles Edward McGee, an American hero who lived in Montgomery County for more than 3 decades and was an integral part of our community, and who will now have a library named in his honor, which has been named in his honor for several months, but now the signage is caught up, and we're really excited to have that community celebration on Saturday. And I want to appreciate the county executive's work with me when I made the suggestion. He said yes before I could even finish making the suggestion. And as lead for libraries, it's meant a lot to me. I know it's meant a lot to the community and to the folks that work at the Brigadier General Charles E. Edward McGee Library at Silver Spring. Really excited about that. He will actually be interned. His family will be in town and they will all be there. He will be being interned at the Arlington National Cemetery the day before on Friday, a well-deserving honor for General McGee. And we really are excited about that. And so we invite people to come out and participate. It'll be a community celebration, and we'll be hearing more about that. And turning to the first issue the county executive mentioned, the rent stabilization. Unfortunately, I have been hearing, as our Department of Housing Community Affairs and as other community partners, about increases. I was proud to offer 2 rent stabilization bills that passed during COVID. It was the first countywide stabilization that was needed, and thankfully we passed them unanimously. That expired in May, May 15th. That was when the first notices of increase could be sent out. And I have been hearing from residents since that time that about astronomical increases. And I just want to remind people that with inflation the way it is, we know costs are high for everyone, and no one is against reasonable increases, particularly for folks who need to do maintenance that have been deferred. But what we can have, and as today we remembered the 60 people in our homeless continuum who died last year, we know how important it is to have a stable housing for health reasons, for economic reasons, for so many reasons. And we have to make sure that that remains a top priority. I'm going to share on my Twitter, with the permission of the resident, later today, and it will be available shortly, Abigail, who sent my office a note saying that she got a rent increase of 19%. And when she wrote in, she lives in Silver Spring, when she wrote into the CanSo group, which is the group that owns this building, they said, and I quote, "While we're currently not offering rate reductions," so she did the right thing. You always say work with your landlord. She reached out and said, "I can't pay 19% increase." And for context, if you're, that's nearly 20%. If you're paying $1,000, it's going up to $1,200, right? If I'm doing my math right, that's a big increase. And they said, "While we're currently not offering reductions or renewals, I understand that the 19% is quite shocking. However, it is in line with pricing for the area. I always encourage residents to look around so you're confident and informed when you decide. This is whether you decide you want to stay in your home." This is one example of what's happening and why we need reasonable stabilization. And we cannot have, in places like Silver Spring, almost 40% of people are renters. We cannot have this type of instability. We're seeing at our courthouses an increase in where tenants who have been renting for 15 years are getting letters saying you're not going to be renewed, and then they have to move, and then that rent for that unit is raised considerably. It's a problem. It's not right. There's a way to do this where people can make a profit, and we can help small landlords as well, where you don't have to do these type of astronomical rent gouging increases. And so we have to have a reasonable baseline in place. I appreciate the county executive for sending a bill over, and I hope that we'll consider it as soon as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Duando. Members of the media, we can open up this section now for questions and answers regarding rent stabilization with the county executive and or the council member. Anybody has questions? I believe Steve Bonnell, but that's the beat. You have questions for the council member. Go ahead. Good afternoon, Steve.
Good afternoon. I believe when these expired, it was at 0.4% for the voluntary rent guidelines. I guess what I'm getting at is how you both reached kind of the executive, I guess, 4.4%. I know you mentioned it's tied to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but just the reason for that number, I guess.
County executive, you're on mute, Mark. You're on mute, Mark.
Yes, please unmute, Mark. Thanks.
So, Steve, you hit the reason for that number. It's tied to the number we use for the rent guidelines, the voluntary guidelines, and we base it on the labor statistics consumer price index. So that's where that number comes from. Trust me, that number is higher than I would like, but it does reflect the way we would normally guide things.
Do you think, given that this goes through, that this is going to be, looking at more of a long-term policy for rent stabilization, just given the cost of living in this area? Is that something that you're looking at?
Well, I've said this before. I think the county has to consider some kind of broader rent stabilization. You can't look at our numbers and look at the number of households who do not live in any kind of subsidized housing, and whose incomes are, particularly below $60,000, and think you're going to be able to house people as rents continue to surge. And even in a good year for lower income folks, rent increases can be devastating. We had guidelines, but the guidelines have always been voluntary. So I think we need a targeted law That, I would not include new construction. I would not include buildings that already have existing moderately priced dwelling units, but I would focus on the buildings that are probably most vulnerable to redevelopment, the most vulnerable to rent increases. And I don't see, if we don't do that, I don't know how we talk about maintaining a diverse county, and there is no housing program I know of or have seen that could address this other than rent stabilization. I get in these discussions with people and they'll acknowledge, yeah, this is a problem, but they don't like the solution, but actually the solution works. And if you ask somebody, well, how else could you address this? You get crickets. And that's the problem. There is no way to do this without making some tough choices.
Yeah, and I would just add, Steve, I have a bill 5220, that I introduced as part of the More Housing for More People package that would provide for stabilization near transit, where it's the highest. Now, it could be broadened to be more countywide. It could be tailored to just new construction, which I think is a reasonable request. I just think we need to take up a policy like that and talk about it, because to the county executive's point, you can't do this with just one thing. We're not going to be able to build our way out of it. And I'm a proponent of building more housing and different types of housing. But you have to also have a stabilization protection for renters, an anti-rent gouging component to it. And there are other places that do it. And I think it has to be a part of the pie. And in fact, I've worked with groups like the Coalition for Smarter Growth, which is normally, very pro-development. They've actually come out in favor of a form of stabilization. So I think we need to get out of these old political divides and say we need to do multiple things to provide housing and safe housing and affordable housing for people. And this is certainly one of the things we need to do.
Do you know when, I'm sure you want to get this through as quick as possible, when you might be able to get it to a vote of the council? That's for you, Will. I know Gabe sets the agenda, but do you know roughly the timeline?
Well, it wasn't, I don't think it was introduced yesterday. I think maybe you guys sent it over yesterday. I didn't see it on the agenda as introduced. But I'll have to double check, but I didn't see it. You were there too, Steve. I don't think it was on the agenda. I know the executive said he was sending it over. Once it's introduced, I have spoken to the council president, who does set the agenda, that I think it should have a public hearing and we should consider it as we would any other bill. And council members can decide where they want to be on it. But I think it's an urgent enough issue. Like I mentioned Abigail's story, she's not alone. This is something that we're dealing with and we need to confront it.
Right, but you can expedite certain legislation. I imagine you'd want to do that here, right?
Yeah, it would be an expedited bill, I think, right, Mark, is what you guys sent over.
Because the expiration of the bill put a timeline before landlords could actually submit rent increases. So it's not clear to me we have to expedite it, because you've already kicked into the 3-month timeline. So this bill would simply delay that 3-month timeline.
Right. Yeah, because as you know, with current laws, or you may know, there's a 90-day window already built into the current law. So you can give the notice on May 15th that the increase is happening, but it couldn't take it in effect until, June, what is that, September 15th, right?
Yep.
The last question I have, and both you can address this if you want, is that I remember when, I think it was one of your bills, Will, that during the public hearing, the building industry landlords are coming up, and the argument is that, supply costs have gone up, we have to cut staff. I just want to give you a chance to respond to that, because that's what the other side of this, I guess, is when it comes to landlords, in terms, they'll have to cut staff, or if they can't raise their prices. That's what they were saying in our public hearings.
You want to address that, Mark?
They were itching for rent increases before the heavy inflation set in. So it's not like this is a sudden reaction to the inflation we're experiencing right now. And there's no certainty this inflation is going to be long-term, but the rent increases will be long-term. If you get a $200, say you had a $1,500 apartment and you got a 20% increase, you think you're looking at, $300 increase. Okay, so you get it this year to cover your increased expenses. If next year's normal inflation, you've still got that $300 sitting there, even if gas prices come back down and other things come back down to earth, you get the permanent gain from that increase. And so, I get what they want. But the flip side of that is $300 off a family that's struggling to pay bills, $300 off their income. That's bags of groceries off the table. That's clothes the kids don't get. That's access to medical care the kids don't get. There's a huge social penalty that gets paid by increasing the poverty that people live in. So if I have to pick a side, I want to do the least damage to the most people we can possibly do. Like I said, even 4.4 is going to be a lift for somebody, but when we're looking at 15 and 20% rent increases, I don't believe the county can allow that to happen. And of course, the landlords could solve this problem by voluntarily agreeing to mitigate things through the duration rather than pushing for these higher increases.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think the vast majority, many landlords are doing the right thing here, what I would say is the right thing, and not having these high increases. But when you have a county of 1.2 million, anywhere from 30 to 40% renting, even if 5 to 10% of these are happening, it's a lot of people, and it's a lot of times people on the margins. And the other thing I'd say, Steve, is that, when you set up, because is not enough housing, and you saw that chart that was shown of how high rents are going, that there is a very constrained market. And so the returns are going to be relatively high. Again, the price that's set is not just to make ends meet for a landlord. They're setting that, they're factoring in profit, many of them. And so I think we have to err on the side of protecting against these really massive increases for people that need it. And no one's saying you shouldn't be able to make a reasonable return or keep up your property. 4.4% is very reasonable. It's not insignificant for some people, and it's going to be a challenge for some residents even at that number. But I think that's the way you get the balancing. We're not saying there's no increase. It's just trying to balance the really important needs of keeping people in their homes at an important time.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Steve. Kevin Lewis, I do see that you have a request for questions on the chat. Is this about rent stabilization or something else that can be done afterwards?
It's on another topic, so if you'd like
Okay.
to ask something,
Okay. Thank you. Just wanted to double check. Kate Ryan, WTOP. I see you have questions for Councilman Yolanda. Good afternoon, Kate.
Hi, I just wanted to touch base and make sure we're talking apples to apples. The recommendation that you're making at this point, is it legislation that would still be a voluntary rate increase that they would agree to, mandatory? And if it's a mandatory, if it's legislation that says, okay, how many apartment owners would that target? Are you talking, everyone who rents, and how long? Sorry, I'm not sure.
It's a 6-month. It's a 6-month extension, Kate, and it's 4.4%, and it's everybody. Obviously, if people are under 4.4%, we're not going to ask them to go up to 4.4, but it's for people going over it. I got a list of what, some of the things we've seen so far: 20% increase in Potomac, 19% in North Bethesda, 19% in Silver Spring, and 11% in Silver Spring, a 10% in Silver Spring, and a 7% in Bethesda. Just put yourself in the shoes of people, with the lower incomes in Montgomery County, and ask yourself, how will they manage this?
Right. And again, in terms of length and effective date, once this is acted on, it would become effective immediately?
Yeah. And last for 6 months.
Got it.
And it would just be, it would be extending the bill that I had previously introduced, but setting the rate at the current voluntary rent guidelines. So it'd be the same bill in effect, is what I'm hearing, Mark. But just the current VRG is just 4.4, not the, because that number has changed based on the consumer price index. It was 2.6 when we started, then it went down to 1.4, and then now it's back up to 4.4.
Perfect. Thank you all very much. Thanks. And I do have questions on separate topic.
Okay. Thank you, Kate. Reporters, any more questions for Councilman Yolanda or the county executive regarding rent and stabilization? Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Council Member, for joining us today, for being our special guest. And now, Mr. County Executive, we can move forward with the public health update.
Sure. So meanwhile, back in the world of COVID, Our COVID update this week, our 7-day new case rate is just above 229 cases per 100,000 people. To put that in perspective, it's half of what we were reporting just a couple of weeks ago. Our hospitalization rate has also dropped, but our CDC community level status remains still at the medium level. I'm hoping optimistically that we will return to the low level again if our trends continue in this direction. Again, we have not yet seen the full impact of what versions 4 and 5 of the variant may bring. So, as always, we believe that you have to maintain vigilance and awareness of how this virus is developing. Sustained COVID safety vigilance with new antiviral treatments and a high vaccination and booster rate have really kept our hospitalization numbers down through the entirety of this latest wave of COVID. In May, we had 21 deaths in Montgomery County due to COVID. That was a 63% increase from April. But our death rate still remains far below the state and the national averages. Our lower rates of death and hospitalizations mainly attributed to the vaccination rate, and specifically our high vaccination rate with older adults and those who are immune compromised. And ever since the beginning of the pandemic, just from my personal perspective, when I saw those body bags coming out of the apartments in New York City and the trucks and freezer morgues, I was determined we were not going to see that in Montgomery County. And keeping our residents alive and safe from this virus has been priority number one from the start for this government. And we've succeeded compared to other jurisdictions, but we still have to remain cautious because the virus continues to mutate, and we have to be certain that our responses meet whatever new challenges the emerging variants may bring. And I think we have the ability to moderate responses, and as the threat goes down, we are a little less concerned and we do things in a less intrusive way. But if things were to trend into the point when we were filling our hospitals up, we would react a little bit more aggressively because we can't afford to have that happen. I know a lot of people want to move on and pretend this is over, but this is not over, and we are not back to normal. But we're in a better place, and we should be happy that we're in a better place, and hopefully we'll stay there. Now it's time to turn our attention toward vaccinating the only group still remaining unprotected from the virus, and we anticipate the FDA will give the final okay to allow vaccines administered to children older than 6 months and younger than 5. And our health department is already planning for launching the clinics and have already ordered vaccines so we can get these clinics going as soon as possible. If all goes well, these clinics will begin on weekends by the end of the month using schools across Montgomery County. Our health experts say there are approximately 40,000 children who could be eligible for the vaccine. Getting them vaccinated would help protect them through the summer and into the fall when school starts again. And we know that in January, when we saw Omicron sweep through our area, that hospitalizations among children rose significantly. We want to prevent that. We want to make sure the kids can stay in school as much as possible without a disruption. Vaccines continue to show that they have life-saving abilities. They may not protect you from getting sick, but they seem to protect you from dying in particular. And the data shows that unvaccinated people who get sick are 8 times more likely to die than someone who's been vaccinated. 8 times more likely. As we prepare for this last cohort to get their vaccines, it's a reminder for all families to boost the safety in our homes, at work, and when we're gathering with friends and family during the summer. So please get vaxxed, get boosted, and get tested, and continue to carry that mask around to use when you're in crowded indoor spaces or on public transportation. We know it works at this point, and this is one of those things that work. So please be careful and avoid being complacent. Before I turn it over to Sean and Earl, there are a couple of other issues that I want to bring to your attention. First, I want to thank Delegate Solomon, Delegate Lopez, and Senator Susan Lee, and all of our gun violence prevention advocates for mobilizing this past weekend for a rally in Wheaton and at the March for Our Lives at the Washington Mall. The outrage over the proliferation of mass shootings and gun violence finally has moved the Senate to create a bipartisan deal. Way too many years late. but better late than never. This is the first time it looks like Congress might pass something addressing gun violence in 30 years. This deal will allow states to implement red flag laws, increase background checks and scrutiny for all those who are under 21 trying to buy weapons, close the boyfriend loophole that would help prevent gun sales to domestic violence offenders, and tightens regulations on gun sellers. It's not enough that it represents the move, but it does represent movement in the right direction for the first time in a very long time. I'm pleased that this proposed deal also comes with money for community health clinics. I've been mentioning for a while that we're looking at restarting community mental health clinics that we used to have in Montgomery County. I've been talking about this for a while now, and hopefully with federal money available for this, we can accelerate the implementation. My goal is pretty straightforward. Not everybody in mental health crisis is in school. So while we, plan on making sure the school system has resources that it needs, we need resources out of school. Not all children will present in school with issues that might trigger somebody asking them if they need help. Parents often know their children need help. I keep thinking about the father of the Uvalde shooter who described his son and what he saw in his mental condition and had nowhere to go. We want to make sure that parents in Montgomery County have somewhere to go, or that young adults or other people who might be suffering in crisis themselves have someplace to go. So my goal is to bring back the clinics, and hopefully the federal aid will help us get this moving sooner than later. One flaw in this bill, other flaws. The bill does not ban assault weapons, nor does it raise the age to purchase guns. So there's still a lot of work to do, but at least something is moving on the Hill, and that's progress. On a sadder note, we've experienced multiple incidents of hate in Montgomery County over the last 2 weeks. On May 31st, KKK imagery appeared on the internet, on an internet app, searches for Damascus High School. On June 2nd in Kent Mill, anti-Semitic flyers were posted at a ride-on station. And last week, on June 7th, swastikas were carved at a MARC rail train station in Garrett Park. I grew up in Montgomery County. I moved here in 1960. We knew there was a Klan. We had Nazis marching in Arlington. It has been a long time since I've seen such blatant displays of hate by groups associated with the Klan and with Nazis. And it is alarming that people feel comfortable enough to go out and do this and actually say who they are. It's a sad commentary on where we've devolved to, but I want people to know that we are going to take this seriously. The flyer on the screen makes reference to a group affiliated with the KKK that was discovered in Chevy Chase. Our residents are rightfully concerned, and we want to assure them that we are mobilized, vigilant, and are investigating each of these incidents. I'm appreciative of the MCPD leadership in collaboration with the community, and we are assuring our community members that we want to make sure they feel safe. Whoever is responsible for these incidents should know that they will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law when we find you. The Jewish Community Relations of Greater Washington, and together with the Anti-Defamation League, community partners, and the Montgomery County Police Department will be hosting an upcoming webinar to discuss the increase of these incidents around the county and what is being done to keep county residents safe. Hate has no place in Montgomery County, and we're going to make sure of that. With all that said, I'm going to turn this over to Sean and Earl for their updates.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. Sean's not here today, but Dr. Bridgers is. Good afternoon, Dr. Bridgers.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. Happy to join you at another COVID update. I have a few slides. It's not in the tradition that Mr. O'Donnell normally go to, but it highlights some of the current trends and it accents some of the data that our county executive shared earlier. So as our county executive indicated, we still have BA2 .12.1 as the predominant strain in not only the nation, but in the state of Maryland and the county as well. Our numbers continue to trend downward, and we anticipate that we should move from a medium community level transmission to a low level transmission within the next couple of weeks, based on our models that we've previously used and have been accurate for the best approximation to date. However, that doesn't mean that we will let our guards down, as Mr. Elrich indicated, that we continue to have BA4 and BA5 out in the community. Our community transmission rate is low, and our test positivity rate continues to decline, as well as our hospital utilization and beds occupied. This is a time for us to continue to evaluate our operations and plan for not only the summer, but look at the direction that we may go in the fall with our operation and access to testing and vaccination efforts. Again, our timeline for our pediatric vaccinations, we've been planning for this along the same timeline back in January, February, when we looked at data and surveillance for the 5 to 11 and now the 6 month to 4-year-old and 5-year-olds for Pfizer and Moderna. We anticipate that they will be approved by FDA. I believe Moderna was approved yesterday. Pfizer is under consideration today. Then it goes to CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. We have worked very diligently and continue to work with our community partners and our public school system to look at access and equity, similar to the 5 to 11 framework that we use. So we built upon that to craft our operation for our baby peds, which is what we are affectionately calling this vaccination strategy, and our last cohort. The Maryland Department of Health sent out a surveillance. We know that our pediatrician, our family practices will be instrumental, but we will continue to work with our partners as we've built a community level trust. And we hope that our countyans will continue to use our sites. Parents will have clinicians on site for our county-led operations to ask questions if they have any questions prior to their child or children receiving their pediatric or under 5-year-old vaccination. And this is just a brief summary of the strategy. Some of this has been repetitive from previous briefings, but just wanted to give an update on where we're going. We built upon what we did with our 5 to 11-year-old cohort, and we are excited to begin our under 5-year-old and last cohort vaccination strategy. Shifting quickly to monkeypox, this is just a graphical representation. There have been no cases reported in the state of Maryland. We continue to work with the Maryland Department of Health and attend trainings with the CDC, as well as monitor health advisory notes to identify, isolate, and inform those respective entities if there is a case. We continue to train our staff and our partners as well and provide them with information. And I'll stop there with the update from Public Health, subject to any questions, and turn it over now to Dr. Stoddard for his comments and or updates.
Yeah, just 2 additional updates. So first off, we did a distribution to our child care centers of rapid test kits. Approximately 18,700 kits went over the 2 days, last Thursday and this past Saturday. So we continue to support the child care providers in their efforts to keep their facilities safe. They can use those test kits to implement a test and stay program if they so choose. We've been supportive in terms of giving them resources to allow them to do that. The other piece I want to make sure is clear. So if you look at some of the rapid test kits that we've been distributing through our libraries and recreation centers, if you look closely at the back, some of those test kits do have an expiration date that is this month. I think on the 26th, it is the first of those that would expire. I want to make clear that we've received, there's a notice, actually, you can find it on the iHealth website. It's from the CDC or from the FDA. They did get a 3-month blanket extension for all rapid test kits produced. So that add 3 months onto the timeline that you see on the back of those boxes that have already been distributed. We're going to make sure we get that notice out there pretty broadly so that people don't believe that they're utilizing expired materials. those have been given a shelf life extension. And I would expect they'll test them again in 3 months and they may be given additional extensions in the future. But minimum speaking, they'll be good until we get into September. So I think that's all I wanted to share this today, and we can take some questions.
Thank you, Dr. Bridgers, Dr. Stoddard. And yes, let's get started with the Q&A portion of the presentation. Kevin Lewis, ABC7, you're first. Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon to you. County Executive Elrich, on Friday, Assistant Civilian Chief Carmen Fasciolo said through his attorney that it's his belief that Police Chief Marcus Jones is conspiring against him in a greater attempt to torpedo your reelection efforts. I wanted to ask if you think the police chief is secretly working against you.
No, I mean, this did not come from the chief. It is a personnel matter at this point, and it's being looked into, and that's all I can say about it.
So you personally have every confidence that Police Chief Marcus Jones has your best interests in mind?
I've seen enough about this incident, and I don't see where it benefits me. It's a personnel incident, and it is being looked at, and from everything I've seen, that's what it is. I don't see the chief doing anything improper. I haven't seen any indication of that.
What is the Assistant Civilian Chief's current employment status with the county?
I guess he's not actively carrying out his assignment, and I forget what the word is for what's the proper term for this?
He's on administrative leave pending the outcome of the review.
And is that paid administrative leave?
Yes.
And do you know what his salary is? I saw that county records indicated the assistant chief salary was like $177,000, but that was a 2,000 figure for assistant chiefs.
I don't know off the top of my head, Kevin, but we could find out what the salary is. I believe it is the same for all the assistant chiefs, and I believe it is around 180. We can find you a number.
All right, and then Executive Elrich, was it your intention to have the civilian chief respond to priority calls? I'm told that happened quite regularly. Was that your vision as a job duty for the civilian assistant chief for this first one or any down the line?
I can't really answer that question. I mean, I would assume, officers and firefighters do things we didn't necessarily think they would be doing, but they respond when they think it's necessary. And, off-duty police officers respond to things when they hear calls out there. So I don't know whether it's proper or improper. That's to be determined.
And then just following up on the attempted murder case stemming from Justice Kavanaugh's home from last Wednesday, what's your stance on protesting outside of Supreme Court justices' homes?
Well, I've had protests outside my house. Look, I think if people are quiet, respectful, aren't disturbing, you ought to be able to do it in a quiet and respectful way. If you're disturbing or making people's lives difficult to carry out, I think that's a bridge too far. You can do that. You can go down and you can protest in front of the Supreme Court and make your bigger point. It's really sad if everybody's going to protest everybody who does something at their houses. We're going to have a very hard time maintaining civil society.
So overall, your takeaway is protesting outside of a house is a good thing, a bad thing?
I would prefer that people put the protests where people worked, which is where it really belongs. But I don't think, I just wish it was done someplace else. That would be preferable.
I'd like to add, so Commander Gagan has, I think for the most part with the Supreme Court justice, number one, there is an ordinance in Montgomery County that requires that you can't statically protest in front of someone's house for political reasons. That's been in place since the 90s. But what has generally happened is that the protesters are told they have to be moving. They can't stay in one place for an extended period of time. And the directive to the police chief and down to the commanders has been to enforce the law as it's written. Now, for the most part, the protesters involved in some of these have been cooperative, meaning in times when they do pause or take extended times, the police say they have to move along. They give them a warning and then they proceed along in all cases. Now, obviously, in some other cases, it hasn't happened yet. But if people decide that they're not going to follow that law, then they'll be detained and issued a citation, and that the process will proceed. But it's, all protesters across the board are treated the same with regard to those policies. There's not going to be an inconsistency based on the political stance you're protesting.
Great. One last question that I had, back to the assistant chief, it had slipped my mind. Did the assistant civilian chief have authority over rank and file officers in, let's say, an example of, you need to broaden the crime scene, you need to turn the lights and sirens on in the vehicle, things of that nature? Did the assistant civilian chief have authoritative power in those capacities over rank and file officers?
Anybody would like to ask that? Do we know the answer to that?
So generally speaking, the assistant police chief doesn't have, the assistant chief, civilian assistant chief does not have police powers, meaning cannot make arrests, cannot, he doesn't have a firearm, all those things. They do have a command director. And so I think the lines get a little bit blurry when you talk about, certainly he is the assistant chief over the bureau. So if he can direct officers in that bureau to take certain actions, but when it comes to exercising their police powers and authorities, probably not. Now, that said, obviously, if there was something that as an assistant chief, he believed or she believed in any case was being done improperly, then yes, they could bring it forward. And, obviously there is an internal affairs division and things like that. So certainly if there is a case where that the assistant chief believes something untoward is being done, then they can bring it forward and that can be reviewed. But generally speaking, you would not have an assistant chief civilian demanding that a sworn law enforcement officer conduct certain law enforcement activities that were part of their specific training and duties, generally speaking.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. Reporters, I do not see any more requests for questions on the chat. Anybody else has questions with officials?
Yes, actually, Kate, Ryan.
Thank you.
I had explained that I did want to come back to the county exec. I do want to follow up on this case involving the civilian chief. What entity conducts this investigation to see whether or not there were ethical violations, and how much teeth does that investigation have?
If it's an ethical violation, it goes in front of the ethics board, and it has teeth. It's not, reports from the ethics board are not taken lightly.
Yeah, I would say so. Typically, the way these work, and this is general for ethics violations. So once it goes to the ethics commission, they'll make a determination about how they would like to conduct the investigation. Meaning, they can choose to conduct the investigation themselves, or they can refer it to the inspector general's office, Ms. Lamarzi, and her office would then conduct the investigation as an independent. It really depends on the nature of the suggested violation and how they believe that the matter could be best investigated. Now, typically, if there are findings in the investigation, they can include fines and or recommended discipline that could be offered based on the potential violation. But obviously, there's a range of potential outcomes depending on the nature of the ethics violation and the nature of the violations. And so there is certainly a range there that can be provided.
Got it. And just so I'm clear on the status now, who is looking into this matter? It is not yet before an ethics board. Who is considering what this situation is?
So it has been shared. There has been conversations with the Ethics Commission and their executive director, Mr. Cobb, or I'm not sure what exactly his title is, Mr. Cobb. And some of the basic facts are still being confirmed of exactly what happened on that date. Trying to get some essentially corroboration on. Obviously, we're familiar with Mr. Fasciolo's lawyer's letter to the media, and so we sort of have an understanding of the perspective being offered there. And so we're obviously just trying to collect some of the information about what happened on that date from the materials that we can access. If there's any sort of tracking or video or anything of that nature that can help corroborate some of the stories, just so we have the facts straight. I think that's the key here, is to make sure that we understand exactly what the story is before we proceed forward with something more formal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Any more questions from reporters? I do not see any more requests on the chat. Going once, going twice. I guess we're done for today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Stay safe, and we'll see you again next week. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you all.